Hi, it's Karolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make this adorable barnyard animal cake. If you want to skip the intro and get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. I'm starting with my cake already baked, filled, iced, and it is in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have videos showing you how I bake my cakes, how I fill them, frost them, make the icing, make the fondant. All of that is going to be linked in the description. And listen, all of the tools that I use and all of the videos that I reference is going to be linked in the description. I get so many people asking me where I got a certain tool or what, where's my cake recipe or whatever. Everything is linked down there below. I take the time to link everything for you. And I will also let you guys know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started. All right, I always tell you guys that I measured my cake and printed out the picture the size that I wanted it to be, and I want to show you what I do. So I have my cake already iced, and I get my ruler, and I see that the cake is 5.5 inches tall, so I want to print this barn out at least 5.5 inches tall. So I print it out, and then I bring that back to the cake to make sure that's the correct size before I start to work on it. Now, if you see my videos, you know what I'm going to say. I have gum tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all the same thing. It's mixed into my marshmallow fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. I find that store-bought fondant is a little too soft, and doing this in marshmallow fondant it sets a little harder, and it makes it so much easier to work with. So I have my marshmallow fondant here, and I usually just store the gum tex powder in that smaller container just because I like it. So I'm sprinkling a little bit on. That's probably like 1/4 teaspoon. Get some Crisco down, and I'm kneading that in there. And it gets that down some cornstarch, and that other fondant all does have that gum tex powder in it. I'm rolling this out for the barn, and I want to make sure that I rolled it out the correct size so the barn will fit on top. I'm doing the same thing for the black fondant and for this white fondant. I'm going to let it sit for like 20 minutes before I use it. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife and a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And you can see how thick that red fondant is. And I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method on here, guys. So I'm taking my Dresden tool and I'm tracing this onto the fondant. And you don't want to press too hard. You want to press hard enough to transfer the line onto the fondant, but not so hard that you poke a hole in it. And once I peel that back, if I can't really see the line, then I just take my Dresden tool and deepen the line. Now I have this ribbon cutter here, and I'm just going to make it like as wide as those little lines on the barn, and I'm not pressing the whole way down. I'm just transferring these lines on here. It's just easier than to trace it through the picture. You could do that if you want to, but then I took my Dresden tool and I just deepened the lines. So I didn't press that ribbon cutter all the way down to the bottom of the fondant. I just did enough to do a line impression in there. And once that is in there, since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I'm just doing a shallow cut, and then I'm putting the knife all the way down to the board and cutting this out. And anytime I cut anything out of fondant, I'm going to take my time and use my fingers to smooth out my cuts. Now I'm doing this white part, so I'm tracing the outside square and then I'm tracing the inner triangles. And you can kind of see I'm not going exactly on the white line. I'm coming in a little bit, so those white lines are going to be a little thicker on the fondant and they won't break as easily. And I'm doing the same thing for the top. However, the little X's on the top part, I'm omitting. I'm just doing little rectangles on either side. Now I'm cutting out the center pieces first because I don't want to ruin this. It's just a lot easier to cut these center pieces. So do you see how I'm starting in the corners and coming in and then turning my X-Acto knife, starting in a corner and going the other way? This way I'm going to get cleaner cuts. So I'm starting down in the corner and then bringing my knife the other way and starting in the other corner and coming in. I hope that makes sense. I just feel like doing it this way, I'm not dragging my X-Acto knife around the corner and it's keeping it nice and sharp, and then I can easily lift these pieces out. And then I am cutting the outside of the square. And again, anytime I cut anything out of fondant, do you see how the fondant is kind of jagged? So I'm using my fingers and using my tools and just pushing those jagged pieces back down on the fondant to smooth them out. And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind this piece and putting it down on that thin black piece of fondant that I rolled out earlier. And I want to take my tools and a straight edge and just get this in the correct position so it's nice and straight. And I'm doing the same thing, get some water behind that bigger piece and stick that down, and then use my tools to straighten it. And now I'm cutting these exactly along that white line. I usually cut a border around pieces in fondant, but for this, I'm not cutting a border. I want this black fondant to be the same length and height as the white fondant. And then I'm smoothing it and realigning it back on top of the picture. And now I have some red and black petal dust. I dip it in the container and then tap it into the little jar to just remove the excess. And the red is very subtle. You can see it up close. It didn't really transfer into the video, but I just did a little bit of red to give it some dimension. And then I'm doing a little bit of black dust in the lines. So this stuff is pretty pigmented and it transfers really easily. So sometimes I tap it down onto the paper just to remove some of the excess so there's not too much on my brush, and just go with a very light hand. And there's no rhyme or reason. I'm just trying to get a little bit of black detailing in all of the lines. Then I'm getting some water behind those pieces that I cut out earlier and sticking them down onto that red piece of fondant according to the picture. And using my palette knife just to straighten it out and make sure that it is in the right position. And now I have this thin black fondant, and it's the same thickness as the red fondant, and I'm tracing the roof onto it, again using my trace, cut, and smooth method. And then I'm going to cut this out. And smooth my cuts. So the same thing for all these decorations, trace, cut, smooth. So I was going to put this on top of that red fondant, and then I thought, hey, this lines up pretty good on the outside and I think it'll stick better. So I'm getting a little bit of water on the edge of the red piece where the black is going to touch. And then I'm putting that back down on my cutting board and just pressing that black fondant against those wet edges that I just did. And using my palette knife just to straighten it out. I'm going to slide that on the sheet of paper and set that aside to dry. Now let's make the pig. So again, I measured my cake and I printed that out the size that I wanted it to be, and let's trace, cut, and smooth this pig into existence. So I'm tracing all of these details. Make sure you get all the lines in the center. And I'm tracing around the ear, and the ear comes down a little bit, and I want to make sure I get where the eyebrows are and the smile, and I'm going to make a little note of where the eyes go. Let's peel that back, and I'm going to use my Dresden tool to deepen the details. And then, since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I like to take the tip of my X-Acto knife and just create a guideline. So I'm running the tip of my knife along the outline of the pig. And then once I have that done, I want to use my ball tool and just press in these inner ear details so it looks like the flap of the ear is sticking out. I will link those ball tools in the description. And then once that's done, I'm sticking the tip all the way down to the cutting board, and I'm using that knife as a guide to cut this out. And since I made that guideline first, I'm not going to mess up the top of the fondant, and it's going to look a lot better. Now, again, I have to use my tools and use my fingers and smooth out my cuts, because no matter how sharp your knife is or how stiff your fondant is, it's still a little jagged when you cut it. So I'm doing the same thing for the snout. I'm tracing it using the ball tool to mark where those holes are going to go, and I'm deepening those little holes, nostrils, if you will, and cut that out, smooth my cuts. And now I want to extend the life of my black edible marker. I have some edible printer ink. You can also use black airbrush coloring, and I just dip the tip of my edible marker in there and I can draw on these eyebrows. Again, I'm using a very light hand. It's kind of like putting on eyeliner. You don't want to press too hard. And then I'm getting some water behind the snout, looking at the picture and sticking that in the correct position. And I'm doing the same trace, cut, and smooth for the little hooves. Is it hooves or hooves? It's hooves. Well, whatever, however you say it, you know what I mean. And I trace them, cut them out, smooth my cuts, and then I am making the eyes. So I just use I think it was like a tip number 6, and I'm just using my fingers to lengthen them into like a little oval shape. These tiny pieces are a pain in the butt to work with. And then I have some carnation pink petal dust, and I'm looking at the picture, and I have a really tiny paintbrush, and I'm just trying to color it in so it looks similar to the picture. Again, I get a little bit, tap it in the lid, and then I'm just kind of coloring it in and giving her a little bit of makeup. And look, she needs a little blush on her little rosy cheeks. And make sure you get all the inner details. So do you see how I'm looking at the picture and just kind of deepening it wherever it looks like it's a darker pink in the picture? And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind the hooves and putting them down. Is it hooves? I know it's pig's feet. It's like Friday. I like pig's feet. Well, pig feet, whatever. You know what I mean? And then getting a little bit of water behind the eyes and sticking them down. And then I got a really, really tiny, like number 2 tip, and I cut out tiny pieces of white fondant. And you see how much of a pain in the butt these small pieces are to work with. And I just put them in for the light of the eyes. And now I need to make the tail. So I'm rolling a piece of the pink fondant into a little point on one end, and then I'm going to cut it off on the bottom. And I just want to kind of curl it into a little pigtail shape. And I'm going to use my ball tool to press a little hole so I can stick the tail in, get a little bit of water in, and bring that bottom part to a point so it can stick in there. And curving it around to keep that little shape. And look how cute that pig is. Let's set that aside. Now I did these in a time lapse, so I'm making the cow, I'm making the horse and the ducks, and I'm doing the same trace, cut, and smooth method. Now all of these pictures that I use are going to be linked in the description, but do you see how I'm cutting all the black pieces, and then I'm coloring him in, and then I'm putting the pieces all back on him, just like I did with the pig. And I drew on the eyebrows and the mouth. And I'm doing the horse now, so I'm doing the same thing. So I traced him on there, and then I cut him out, smooth my cuts. Then I'm getting all of the little brown pieces on there, so I'm tracing it onto the brown fondant, cut it out, smooth my cuts. Trace the black pieces on there, cut it out, smooth my cuts. I'm doing the same thing, looking at the picture, coloring it in, and then gluing all the pieces on with water. And I set those aside. And then he wanted 4 ducks. He wanted a mommy, daddy, and brother and sister duck on his cake. So that's why I did 4. And I did 2 facing right and 2 facing left. I had no idea. I just felt like it would be better if they weren't all facing the same way. And I'm kind of glad that I did because it ended up looking a lot better. But I'm doing the same thing. I used a leaf cutter to cut out the wings, and I pressed it on a veiner to give it a little detail. And then I glued all of the pieces on there with water and set those aside to dry. Now I'm making the number, and I rolled that white fondant out like about a 1/2 inch thick, and I'm tracing this on there. And then I started to make my shallow cut in this fondant, and it was starting to drag a little bit. And then I decided I need to start all over. Do you see how wrinkly that is? It's not stiff enough. I have to start all over. So I added more Tylose powder, kneaded it in, and let it sit for about 10 minutes before I started this again, and it's not dragging as much. So if your fondant is too soft, sometimes you have to start all over. So I did a shallow cut with my knife in the white fondant, and then I traced that number 3 onto the black fondant, and I'm cutting little cow prints. So I'm using the edge of the 3 as a guide, and I'm cutting along the edge and then cutting little squiggly lines in the middle. This will make sense as we go. But this way, the cow print is going to contour to the shape of the 3. Now I'm going to stick my knife all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. You can see that the fondant is still a little soft, but it's not dragging too much, so it's not that bad. But I'm just working in little sections to cut this out. And then let's flip that over, use my fingers, use my tools, and smooth it from the back, and then flip it over and smooth it from the front. Now I have a skewer. I'm going to twist it in here. I'm not going to push it in, and I can't go over in the middle. I have to do it a little over to the right so you can't see it. And then I could see that skewer in here, so that fondant is too soft. So I'm going to wait and do that in about 2 hours after this fondant gets a little hard. So I'm getting some water behind these pieces and gluing them down. And do you see how they contour to the shape of the 3? So let's realign that on top of the picture. I'm going to set that aside to dry. Now I'm doing the same thing for the trees. So I'm tracing the brown tree trunks onto this thin brown fondant and then cutting out the trunks and smoothing my cuts. And then, do you see how this tree was cut off? So I have to continue the pattern. So I'm just kind of looking at the picture and just trying to make it look as symmetrical as possible. And then cut that out and smooth my cuts, and the same thing for this one as well. Now I need to add a little dust. So I have green petal dust, and I'm just shading in the edges of the tree, kind of like how it is in the picture. And then I'm going to shade in the trunk with some brown petal dust. You really can't tell in the video, but it did give it a little bit of dimension. And let's set those aside. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and do you see how I offset the cake on the cake board? So it's pushed back to the back of the cake drum, so that way I will have room for my decorations. I'm measuring how long my ribbon has to be and getting some non-toxic glue around the board, and I got it on back of the ribbon as well. Wrap that around the board and get a little more glue down where it overlaps and press that down. And now I have an icing bag with the tip number 5, and I'm holding this up just to see where it's touching the cake and get a little bit of icing behind it, and then press that onto the cake. So remember, that cake is cold. The icing is hard and solid, so I'm not going to mess it up. And I just played this little game. I hold it up and I see where it looks good, and then I get a little bit of icing behind it and stick it down. Now I have some piping gel that I'm going to get behind the trunk and stick that on. I feel like the icing would have seeped out underneath. And same thing for this tree on the other side. And now I'm getting a toothpick in the bottom of the number 3 so it doesn't twist when I put it in the top of the cake, and I'm putting that down. And now I play my little game of where should everything go? So he looks good there, he looks good there. Maybe I should put her, should I put her in the middle? Should the horse be in the front? Maybe I should put her on top. No, I don't like her up there. I'm going to put her down here. You know, so I just hold them up and see where I like them the best. And then again, I'm pulling the cow away, seeing where it's touching the barn, and I'm just getting a little bit of icing behind it, and I feel like it was going to seep out the top, so I just removed a little bit of it so you couldn't see the icing and press that down. And then the same thing for the horse. I'm looking at where it's touching the barn and getting some icing behind it to stick it down. And that icing is going to solidify when I put it back in the fridge, so it's not going to fall. So I have some blue icing and some white icing and a little bit of royal blue coloring. I put 2 drops in here, and I'm not mixing it up. I want a little variation in the color, and that's American Buttercream. So the same thing for the ducks. I'm getting 2 toothpicks underneath it, so that way they're not going to twist when they're in the top of the cake, and I did that for all 4 of them. And then I'm going to do a little bit of like a water effect on the top of the cake. So I had to add a little bit more white icing because I want a color variation. And I'm just putting that along the entire top. And then I decided that I wanted to put it on the whole thing. So I'm removing the number 3 and getting a little bit more water underneath. Oh, and I mean icing water, not real water. And just making sure that's almost touching the edge and giving a little bit of a water pattern to it. And then I added a little more food coloring just to give it some more dimension. And then I put the number 3 back down into the cake, and I'm putting the ducks in there as well. So I start with the daddy duck in the back and the mommy duck in front, and then the brother, and then the sister. And now with the pig, I'm paying attention to where it's going to touch the horse and get a little bit of icing. You don't want too much icing because you don't want it to seep out the back. And then I'm making clouds. So I have a number 10 tip in that icing bag, and I'm just squiggling lines and kind of making it look like a buttercream cloud. And then I have an icing bag with a grass tip on it. And do you see how you have to squeeze and lift up at the same time? And then I stop squeezing and it looks like grass. And then I'm dipping my paintbrush in water and pushing in my points. Do you see how there's points on those clouds? Push in your points, people. It looks so much better when you do that. And here is the cake. How cute is that? So there you go. How adorable is this cake? I just love this design. Now, she did originally send me a cake that she wanted. I'll try to find it and put the picture over here. And I asked her if I could put my own spin on it. And I love when customers say this, she said, go ahead, do your thing, do whatever you want. And I feel like when people do that, it takes the stress off of your shoulders. It just makes the cake decorating so much more fun. And in turn, I love the result. So the inside of this cake is a 3-layer, not torted, 7-inch cake. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cake layers, and I will link that in the description. Now, I don't always like to dry my decorations with a curve to them. I don't always like to contour them to the cake. Sometimes I just feel like if you dry it flat, it stands out from the cake and it just gives it a different look. So if you wanted to dry the barn or the animals with the shape, to contour to the shape of the cake, you can do two things. Either find a cake dummy, a 7-inch cake dummy, the size of the cake that you're putting it on, and you can rest those decorations on that dummy so it could dry with a curve. Or you can store it in a Ziploc bag until you're ready to use, and it will keep it pliable, and then you can contour it to the shape of the cake when you put it on there. But recently I've just been doing a lot of the flat decorations just because I prefer that look. Now, just to decorate this cake probably took me around 8 to 9 hours. Those fondant decorations take a little while to do. And to bake, fill, and ice the cake was another like 2 hours or so. So the total time to make the cake was about 11 hours. And what did I charge? This cake was $340. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave them in the comments below. And just a reminder, I do have a KakeAcademy membership program. There are 3 tiers to the membership. The base tier is a cake pop tier, and I don't do cake pop tutorials. I just gave these cute little cake related names. And you can help support me monthly and help me create more content for you and get access to free and discounted extras. Extras are things like recipe ebooks and PDFs that I release. And then the top 2 tiers, the cupcake tier and the dessert table tier, both have access to my exclusive Facebook group. And in that group, I go live. We give pricing advice and cake critiques, and we are having so much fun in that group. I would love to have you aboard, so I'm going to link that information in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. The link is down below. And I would love it if you could keep in touch on socials, and you could check out my website. And if you want to see another barnyard cake that I made, you can watch this video next, and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.